name's Randall Thomas. I work for a company called Engine Yard. We do a lot of stuff in the Ruby space, mostly around hosting and a couple other projects. But one of the things I was actually going to talk to you guys about today was the concept of value. And it's something that's kind of central to every sort of business. How many people in here actually are running their own business, are actually responsible somehow for the revenue portion of it? Good. Okay, you're in the right room, right? That's the whole point of this. If you're responsible for generating revenue for a company or actually somehow contributing revenue for the company, you're actually really responsible for finding value and actually pushing it out there and selling it. So the question becomes, because so many of us, actually, how many people here come from a technical background versus like a sales background? Almost everybody, once again. So, for a lot of technologists, the idea of selling is almost an anathema to them, right? It's not something that they're actually used to doing. It's not something they're necessarily comfortable doing. But still, if you're running a business, you've got to do it. And one of the ways you can actually do that is actually by finding your value and actually understanding what it is and selling that because it's something you can believe in. Before I worked for Engine Yard, I actually ran my own consulting company called Evo Martini Software. We did like hardcore geek crap, like applied statistics, data mining, like helping drug companies push more drugs out to you. And so Engine Yard was actually one of my clients for a very long time. But they did this thing where apparently contractors don't get stock. So I had to trade it in, and I became an employee. And so after I went to work for Engine Yard, a really funny thing happened on the way. This is what I used to do, and then they put me into the most amazing position ever. They made me a sales guy, which to anybody who's an engineer, making you into a sales guy is essentially somewhere between cutting off your testicles and casting them to the wind, and then telling you have a choice between your left hand and your right hand, but you can never write code. Or, I don't know, maybe something more passionate about. It's like telling a VI guy he's got to use Emacs for the rest of his life. So, yeah. So I guess this is like the fundamental question, right? What is value? It's really kind of interesting. If you go try and look up a dictionary definition of value, you're going to end up getting 9,000 different things. As it turns out, people have actually gotten PhDs studying what value is. Economists, right? They actually spend a lot of time writing these papers that anywhere vary in length from 20 pages to 200 pages about what value is and what it means. So, it's skipping the obligatory sort of Wikipedia definition. Value is really the most fundamental unit of commerce. It's like no matter what you're doing or no matter what you're selling, you have to have value to exchange. It doesn't matter whether it's money that you're actually exchanging your services for or whether there's actually something like a favor. Hey, I helped you move last time, so you've got to help me with these books today, or you've got to help me paint my garage. I think everybody's been there in that sort of scenario where you help somebody move, and then when you call them back up and it's your turn to move, they don't respond, and you feel like they got something for nothing in that exchange. So that's the basic concept of value. One of the other things actually we also want to know about value is that there are two sort of key components. You can argue about it, you can go round and round, but it really comes down to a fundamental combination of two things, logic and emotion, right? We all have logical reasons why we pick certain products, but we also have emotional reasons, right? A Geo Metro will get you from point A to point B in the exact same way that a Ferrari will, but it will not get you there in the exact same style. So logically, if you just needed to get from point A to point B, any old conveyance would work. So the question is, why do we spend so much time doing things like customizing cars, caring about brands? What are these things? These are all emotional connections that we feel with that product. And that's part of the value that we derive from actually having that product. So this is something that you need to understand when you actually have a business or a brand. As you're building it, you need to be able to connect with somebody on both a logical and emotional level. Otherwise, you're always going to be missing out on reaping some of the value that you could otherwise be harvesting. And that means that you're going to have reduced revenue from people. So, well, I guess we actually skipped to the end here. Shortest conference slide ever. I saved you an ungodly amount of your time. Do you know how much that's worth to you? So, okay. Anybody ever see like that old show In Search Of? It had like Leonard Nimoy and everybody? Yeah, okay. I don't know. So they used to basically do these things like In Search Of Bigfoot. It was always in search of Atlantis. It was in search of this mythical thing that you could never necessarily find. It made for a great 30-minute show of seeing like crackpots tell you that aliens actually built the pyramids and stuff. But I really liked it as a kid because it actually has this concept of openness. Value is not actually something that's really easy to come by because it means something different to everybody, especially depending on what your company is. Value is something completely different at IBM than it is to the people here in this room, right? How many people here have ever actually dealt with a large monolithic company? How many people enjoyed it? Yeah. I actually, at one point in time, I worked for the government, and I will tell you, their sense of value was completely skewed. It was interesting. I learned a lot about it, though. So let's address one of the fundamental types. We have found value, right? When we look at value, you can really kind of break it down into 3 chunks. The first one is found. This is the stuff that's just lying around. These are the things that you actually have in plain sight that you might not understand the value of them. Has anybody ever seen any of those like antique roadshow things where somebody's like, hey, I've got this beat up cloth. What's it worth? And he's like, oh my God, this is a late 12th century so-and-so. It's actually really valuable. And the guy basically says, honey, we're moving out of the trailer, right? That's found value. This was the idea that there's something under your nose sometimes that you don't understand the value of it, and that can actually be really detrimental. This is one of those things that a lot of times, especially us as technologists, we don't understand. We focus on technology a lot, right? But we don't understand that there are all these things that we like to refer to as soft skills. Most of the things that you're poorly evaluated in on that job review. Those things actually have value, and those are the things that you can find. So there's another type of value, and created value. How many people here would actually consider themselves an entrepreneur? Once again, I'm guessing most of the hands will go up. Right. You're in the right place, once again. If you're an entrepreneur, this is where you spend a lot of your time being focused, right? You're about finding new markets. You're about creating something that doesn't exist. You're about exploring or otherwise giving the market something that wasn't there before. It's really an act of creation, and that's actually, I think, it's one of those things that sort of taps into the artistic side of what we do. This is actually where we spend a lot of our time as entrepreneurs. So we're going to go into that one in pretty much in depth. Preserve value. This is an interesting one because anybody here ever been part of a software rescue? You basically have to do it. I know HashRocket actually offers that at Surface, right? You'll come in and help us unscrew up the project that somebody else started. What you're talking about there is that this person has something called sunk cost, right? They've already put $100,000 into it, and they're going to get either nothing out of it or they're going to save something out of it. So they're preserving the investment that they've already made. This is like doing maintenance on your car. This is actually a key thing also. You can really mispreserve value, but a lot of time this is associated with risk mitigation, right? So those are sort of the 3 types of value that we're going to deal with. Found value. It's kind of like this, this slide intentionally left blank. So I'm going to tell you the easiest way to generate value for the client. The easiest way to generate value for a client is go in, have an existing problem, and then tell them it's not a problem. It's like ignoring something and knowing what to ignore is incredibly valuable, right? You can walk in and see a team in chaos and they're focusing on all these things, core metrics, they're focusing on testing, but guess what? The application doesn't work. They don't even know what they're writing. So all of a sudden you're like, you know what, screw this, forget this, let's sit down and do some storyboarding, let's stop writing code, let's start focusing on doing something. So by ignoring a problem and knowing what to ignore, sometimes that's actually just instantaneous value that you can deliver on the spot. And people go like, whoa, never thought of it that way. So don't forget to do this, right? Because sometimes you can take a really complicated problem and actually it just goes away if you just ignore it. So, perfect example. Anybody know what this is? Oh, come on, there are some math geeks. Raise your hand, shout it out. What's that? Right. So this is a famous theorem because there was this guy in Vermont, he basically said, oh, hey, I've got a really elegant proof to this set of equations, and I can solve it really quickly here. I'm going to jot it down in the margins, but I'll do it later. Then he died. It's like, anybody know Joseph of Arimathea? Anybody see that one? Yeah, well. It's like, it's the same concept for Monty Python, right? So basically, everybody was driving themselves nuts for 357 years to find a solution to this problem. And you know what? One of the things that's really funny about this is that the proof to this problem is 200 pages long. And it uses types of mathematics that didn't even exist in Fermat's time. So the question is, was he lying? Was he bullshitting? Did he know he was going to die? Is it a cosmic joke? We don't know. But if they had just merely ignored it and said, you know what, it's really not that important, we would have saved millions of mathematician hours over 357 years. So, you know what? Sometimes it's good enough, even though the problem's hard, sometimes you can just ignore it and it's okay. You know what? Another thing that you can do is you can actually look at an existing problem but look at it differently. Everybody's flown Southwest, right? At some point in time in your life, you've been forced to, you've done steerage on it. It's unlike almost most of the other airlines in that they were turning a profit at a time with almost every other airline was literally falling out of the sky, if not on Wall Street, actually sometimes in the air. And they did something interesting. They actually they understood that one of their basic costs of doing business was fuel. So they set up a hedge fund, the same way that actually lots of investment companies would set up a hedge fund to actually hedge the cost of fuel. And then they went back and they did something even worse. They sold that hedged fuel that they were making money on, that they actually had derivatives contracts for, they sold it to the competitors. So these guys had to buy their fuel from Southwest to fly their own planes because Southwest was still making money off of them, but it was still cheaper to buy the fuel from Southwest. So basically, they started doing this in 2000. It was interesting, right? Because this was something they already had. They already had financial analysts on staff. They already had contracts for fuel. They just took a look at the problem and just looked at it in a slightly different light. And using the people and actually the things that they understood right there, they were able to actually turn a profit. The key point here is that you have to leverage what you already know sometimes to solve these problems. Don't basically just abandon it or look for the next greatest thing in trying to deliver this value, because sometimes you've got the tools and the skills right here. There is an update on this. Southwest later actually did get burned by this as fuel prices dropped. But it took about 6 years. They are actually doing on a pretty good run. So, you know what? The key point there is make sure that when you're doing found value sorts of explorations, you have to have a really good understanding of what that value is and how you're delivering it. So another approach, found value. You can resurrect an old problem. This is like when you go back to like your idea file or something. It's like, hey, you know, we never really fixed that continuous integration problem we were having. We never really fixed problem X, Y, or Z. We always have a couple problems that were never solved satisfactorily, right? So don't overlook the value of incremental improvement to small things, right? Sometimes you just need a small fix to something to actually generate or derive some value. So here's what actually going to be one of my favorite examples of this. Tell me when you recognize it. So we're up to Windows 3.1, Windows 95, Windows NT, Windows 98. This is always my favorite part. Windows 98 second edition. Windows ME. Yeah, and then actually, what was the other one? There was another Windows Millennium Edition, and then there was another Windows Millennium Edition. These are all Windows 98, and then there was Windows 2000. Windows XP, which, by the way, Windows XP was the final implementation of all the stuff that was supposed to have been implemented in Windows 95 Chicago, if I remember correctly. They finally got most of the feature set in there. I don't even know how you can actually have a Windows 98 Millennium Edition. It's kind of an oxymoron to me. So a couple different versions of Windows XP, Professional Edition, Windows Server 2003. So this was actually Windows fundamentals for legacy PCs. It was designed to run on PCs like that were small devices that were less than 300 megahertz. Released in 2006. Didn't even know it existed. Then they released Windows XP 64-bit edition. Then Vista. And then Server 2008. And now we're looking at Windows 7. So if you look at this, this is the tree pulled off of Wikipedia of all the different versions of Windows. They've been actually averaging, I think the first one was in 1985, they've actually averaged more than one release a year of some type of Windows. And this doesn't include the embedded versions of Windows. They are beating that thing to death with incremental improvements, right? But somehow or another, they're still managing to make money. I would hazard a guess if I were to put Office 2000 and whatever the latest version is, 2008, next to Office 2002, most common users would not be able to really tell the difference. But still, they managed to sell it, right? So they're doing incremental improvements. What they're doing is they're leveraging their own existing value, right? So they've done a really good job of it. It's given them 93% of the market share. So, you know, we'll see how that goes. Don't overlook basically the idea of delivering value for your clients by doing a small improvement for them. It's actually something that you can really work with. The other thing is, beware the revolution. A lot of times when we start looking for ways to improve things, we fundamentally change the nature of the product that we actually are trying to improve. And this can actually have really dire consequences for your brand, and it can actually have really dire consequences for your sort of fan base. Anybody here know what this is? Good. iDrive. So BMW, right? Well-known German design house, really great for quality. They actually came up with this really great idea that said, hey, computers are running everything in a car, we should put a mouse-like thing in it. They have all these models, right? Everything from 1s, 3s. And they, generally speaking, they segment along demographic lines. Older people have a tendency to drive something called a 745. Anybody seen it? Big, huge, really comfy. The average age of a 7 driver was something like 54 years old. This was the place that they tested the computer-driven mouse in the iDrive system. The 7 was one of the first models to get it. The laughter obviously tells exactly what happens. I distinctly remember a friend of mine, he was an older gentleman, he was a doctor, he had driven nothing but BMWs since the 1980s. He got a 7, and then he took it back and got a Mini Cooper. Because he didn't like the iDrive. It was so alien to him, he wanted one without an iDrive, because he just couldn't fiddle with the knobs. So sometimes you have to be worried about doing too many incremental improvements, where all of a sudden the next thing you know, what you fundamentally ended up with was not what you started with. So that's a real danger, and it's something that can actually detract value instead of creating it. You know, BMW has actually done this several times. Anybody remember the 5 deck lid? There was a big thing when they redesigned the BMW 5 Series, which had a lot of adherents, that they were like, the new car is ugly because it was such a departure from the existing models. So just be careful with that. Make sure that when you actually are adding that incremental value, you're not incrementing yourself to a new place. You're actually not causing a revolution and some discomfort amongst your users. So, created value. As entrepreneurs, this is where we spend most of our time. We're trying to create something new. It might be a product, it might be a service. Cloud services are really big these days. You know what? The one thing that we're actually often looking for here is the fact that we actually have an ability as entrepreneurs to look at a problem in a completely different way than other people, right? And the difference between found value and an entrepreneurial found value is one of innovation. When we start looking at creating value as entrepreneurs, we're talking about innovating. We're really talking about doing something which is outside of it. It's like things like, oh, I don't know, why own your own servers? I mean, how many people here actually still have a physical plant that they operate? I do, but I'm in the hosting business. So, I mean, more and more people, especially startups, are choosing not to own it. And, you know, this is something that 10 years ago would have been completely out of whack with the alignment of what the best practices were. So, a lot of times, this is what we do. Who here has actually heard of the X Prize, like the X Prize Foundation? Right. Great idea. All they said was, what's really wrong with the standard model of actually giving people money? Is that you give them money and nothing happens. Well, I don't know, what if we made them do something first, then gave them the money? Novel concept, right? But it's generated things like Armadillo Aerospace. People are actually being able to send, you know, rockets and aerospace vehicles into low Earth orbit without necessarily having to go through the entire concept of a funding round that's several $billion and run by the government. That's a great example of entrepreneurial thinking. It's a great example of looking at a problem in a different light and basically being innovative with the solution. Sometimes it doesn't take much. Banner year for some people. This guy didn't even get to the right place where he thought he was. But yet and still he's hailed as an inventor of actually all these things in travel and actually changing the way that we looked at trade and trade routes. Magellan was another explorer at the same time who actually was hailed for killing essentially 220 plus people on 3 ships over 2 years. Only 18 men survived. But when they got back, they're like, hey guys, thanks for circumnavigating the world. So, you know, you have to be careful about the way that you actually innovate, right? It can actually be destructive in sometimes, especially with small companies. Too much innovation and too much ways of trying to look at a new problem can actually draw focus away from delivering or focusing on your core competency, right? It's really easy to get bogged down in actually implementing features that you think are cool that your clients are never, ever going to use. So that actually sort of plays into the next concept, which is simplify the complicated. This is like, the best example I can think of this one is the 37 signals model, right? It's like Basecamp, High-Rise. High-Rise is not Salesforce.com. And no matter how much you wouldn't try and make High-Rise look like Salesforce.com, it's never going to do that. It's like just enough CRM, right? Simplification of things is actually really important. iPod, you know, the touch remote. It's really simple, right? Everybody can figure it out. These actually add value to people. Making things simple and making these decisions easy for people actually adds a lot of value. There's a gentleman who wrote a book called The Paradox of Choice, which talks about how consumers actually start feeling anxiety when they're faced with too many choices. Too many choices actually makes people feel like they don't know what they need to do, they don't know actually how to approach the product, or they don't know actually how to basically derive the value from it. And then a lot of times they actually care not to do it. Amazon is a really good example of making things easy. Anybody here actually subscribe to Amazon Prime? I do. It's like they gave it to me for a year for free and I never turned it off. Now I am so lazy, it's like I just click on stuff and it shows up and I don't even remember ordering it. Boxes just kind of appear and I'm like, I guess I ordered it. Because they just made it so completely easy. I no longer have to think about shipping. I really no longer have to think about where I'm shipping it to, and I really no longer have to think about the overall cost because they're like, it's $70 a year. You know what? Ship as much stuff as you want. And as a result, I went from buying 1 or 2 things a year at Amazon to, God only knows, I'll probably buy about 3 or 4 things a month. So simplify the complicated. It's actually a really great way to actually show and actually demonstrate value to people. So the last one, this one is actually kind of one of my favorites because this is what we do, right? We're geeks. People who actually are interested in informational exchange are really about educating. We get together in groups and what do? We exchange information. We stand up every morning with each other and what do? We exchange information about what we did yesterday. Educating an audience or educating somebody is actually highly valuable. The problem is that value isn't immediately realized and sometimes it's very difficult to communicate. Education doesn't always have an immediate payoff. It's not like, for instance, running 5 miles where you can see how many calories you burned. Sometimes education has a payoff that is only intrinsic or actually only shows itself later. Maybe you spent 6 summers at Boy Scout camp and it's actually going to be completely useless until your plane crashes in the Andes and you know actually how to kill one of your friends correctly. These are the sorts of things which you're like, thank God I went to Boy Scout camp. So, you know what? Don't underestimate the value of education. This is actually, I think, one of the open APIs are a really great example of this, right? We're all about RESTful APIs and letting us do our own integration, right? What you're doing is you're educating somebody about the product and where the touch points are, and you're basically giving them the tools to innovate on their own and on their own terms. That's really important because it allows people to feel free to basically do things and solve their own problems in their own way. It's one of the slowest ways to create value, but it actually has one of the largest ROIs. Think about Linux, other open source software projects. That's essentially what we're doing is we're educating people about ways that they can actually work with software. No, software doesn't necessarily have to be proprietary. So next time you actually want to, you're thinking about these things, don't forget to actually educate your client. There's a company we work with closely called Pivotal Labs, and one of the things they do is they actually have their clients come in and sit with them, and so they teach them how to agilely develop software. They help them hire people, and their idea is to basically move people in, teach them how to write good software, and then move them out. And the idea that is of value is because what you've done is you've taught that client how to fish. You didn't just actually make them dependent upon you. You actually made that person understand exactly what the value was in writing good software and actually having good practices. So, think about educating your clients the next time you're engaging with them. Once again, this is most of us in this room. We like exchanging information. Make sure you understand that value and make sure you communicate it to your client. And who knows, maybe it'll get you an extra bump in 20 in your bill rate. So one of the final things that we do all the time is we actually have to look at preserving existing value. This is the concept of things like sunk cost, right? If you've already invested in something, you've invested in a technology platform, there's a barrier that you actually have to overcome. So it makes sense to actually apply value to help people preserve what they've already invested in. It's an easy sell. Basically, this is a sort of value proposition that people inherently understand. How many people here have like big screen TVs, a good stereo, Xbox 360, electronics, personal electronics? Something, okay. An item of electronics that costs more than $1,000? I see a lot of MacBook Pros in here. How many people have an alarm system at their house? Not as many hands. Yeah, so the question becomes, it's like, you have probably, God only knows how much in electronics, TVs, CDs, photos, any of these other things, but you're not going to spend the $99 with ADT to actually protect it. So think about that when you actually talk to a person, which, right, this is one of the basic concepts of things like agile testing, right, which is you have the software investing, but you're not going to basically invest in the idea that you have to maintain it later. It's a pay me now, pay me later point. So preserving existing value and educating people why this is important is a really great way to show and demonstrate value. Part of this is actually also just solving a problem once. I know one of the things when I was running a software consultancy, it was really funny. Every 3 weeks, somebody would call me up and say, hey, I've got a new social network, user-generated content, but it's completely different than every other one. And it's like, really? Completely different than Facebook, completely different than MySpace. And it's like, oh yeah, completely different. It's for dogs. And then like 3 weeks later, it would be like, completely different, but it's for cats. And you're like, gosh, why is this actually going on? There is absolutely value in making sure that your solution is widely applicable and that you actually solve the problem once. How many people here have actually run a blog? Their own blog. How many people have actually been running their blog on the same platform for 6 months?
Or more.
Yeah, or more. How about 2 years? Yeah. How many people? I mean, this is exactly the point. It's like 3 years, anyone? 4 years? So we've got about 3 hands. So if you go to Wikipedia, you'll find 45 different open source blogging engines listed. 45. I mean, this is a well understood problem, right? We all know how to write a blog. We can write one in 15 minutes. We've seen the screencasts that show us it can be done. So the question is, why do we need 45 blogs? I mean, even in, okay, so here's a better question. In the Ruby community, what is the preeminent blog? What's the blog engine that you have to use?
WordPress.
It's true, because it is kind of true, because I run my blog on WordPress. So, guilty as charged. Right, but we've got all these different things. Radiant, typo, gist pages. You know, there are any number of things that you might use. So solving the problem once actually has inherent value. Rechargeable batteries. What problem does it solve? I don't have to worry about finding a AAA battery. I mean, it's really annoying. You're sitting down, you're about to watch a DVD, and the first thing that happens is the remote doesn't work, right? And you got to scrounge around. Is it AA? Is it AAA? Well, if you got rechargeables, right? Screw it. I'll just throw them in the charger, and we're done. It takes one thing that you don't actually have to worry about. I don't have to worry about solving the problem of batteries again. So remember, when you're solving these problems for your client and you're actually demonstrating this value, that solving their problems and then solving it forever is very, very valuable. This is like, hi, I'm going to give you a solution to your problem. You're not going to have to invest anything in it going forward. That's incredibly valuable, and it's really powerful. This is actually one of the cornerstones of brand loyalty, right? If you're Coke or Pepsi, it doesn't really matter. The thing is that you know if you buy a Coke or a Diet Coke, you like the taste of it, you don't have to worry about it. If all of a sudden you've got like Royal Crown Cola or some like, Foo Cola, you're like, which one do I pick? I don't know. You basically have to go through the problem evaluation chain once again. So solve a problem once, and you'll actually end up generating a lot of value for people. So one of the things to understand is that these are not like discrete points of value. These are mix and match propositions that go along with this, right? Netflix is a perfect example of a mix and match value proposition, right? They took something old, video rentals, and they turned it on its head by doing things like, well, screw it, late fees suck. Let's just charge everybody a flat fee for however many movies they want. Oh, and maybe we can send them to you in the mail so you don't actually have to basically go to a video store and get 60 copies of the latest really bad movie and like 3 copies of the movie that you wanted that are never going to be back, right? So that's actually the combination of those things represents innovation, and it created a lot of value for people. So, one of the things, like I said, the title of this talk was about selling value, right? And if you're all responsible for revenue in some way, at some point, you're actually going to be responsible for selling something. So this is where we actually get to the selling part. I think it's really safe to say value is pretty much the only thing that is ever sold, and it's pretty much the only thing that's ever bought. You've got to have a value proposition for somebody or something for there to be an exchange of barter. Otherwise, you're just mugging somebody. But even then, there's a value proposition, right? If I pull out a 45 and I say, your wallet or your life, it's an even exchange, right? You're offering me my life for exchange for my wallet. I never really liked that wallet anyway, so go right ahead and take it. So even then, there's still some sort of value exchange that's going on there. And we make these value decisions every time. So it's very helpful to be aware of them. So one of the things that Obi said in his keynote earlier this morning, which was really fascinating, it kind of resonates with me, because you have to communicate value. And I can't stress this enough. Value that cannot be communicated does not exist. It doesn't matter if you're the most badass programmer ever. If nobody knows about it and you never write any code and nobody's ever seen it, it didn't happen, right? It doesn't matter if you have a perfect solution to your client's problem. If they don't know it and they don't know how hard you're working on it, you are not working. So if you're not communicating constantly with your client about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and how well you're doing it, you are not actually delivering any value. I don't care if you're solving their problems in 3 hours when everybody else told them it was going to be 300. The guy who actually bills them 300 hours and talks to them every day will actually have a happier client at the end of the day, and they'll actually have more perceived value from that client than the guy who actually solves it in 3 but never tells them how it was done, why it was done, or what they did when they were doing it. So make sure that you're in constant contact. The thing, we have lots of tools to do this. We have metaphors, we have stories, we actually have email, we have telephones, we have SMS messages. You've got these tools at your disposal, so use them. Project that stuff out there. Make sure that you're actually communicating with people, and make sure that they understand exactly what you're delivering in terms of value. As a consultant, I can't stress this enough. Your referrals are basically predicated upon the understanding that this person, you were communicating with them, and they actually had a really good feeling about how much value you were delivering and when you were delivering it. So this is one of my favorite sort of like, sniglet type words. This was, has anybody actually seen this definition before? Sarcasm? So if anybody here has done consulting, we have always had a client that doesn't get it, right? How many people in here actually do pair programming or actually use pair programming as part of what they do? Oh, this is pretty good. So how many people have ever actually had like a client when they said, wait, I'm paying two guys to do the same thing? That they basically instantaneously sit there and say, oh, wait, so one of these guys is just sitting around doing nothing? I don't get it. I'm paying double. This is one of the things you have to watch out for. There is a gulf between what you're actually communicating to the client and what they're going to understand. This is one of the things you have to watch out for, right? Because a lot of times we actually like to have these implicit understandings. It's like, did you hear what I said? Absolutely. I heard what you said. But did they understand it? If the client is not understanding the value that you're actually delivering, even if you're communicating it, if they don't understand it, once again, you're not delivering value. They need to understand what you do and why you do it. I will tell you, working at Engine Yard, we actually have a really big problem with this because we're kind of like infrastructure. We're like the power company. Nobody really cares as long as the lights are on. As soon as the lights go off, man, are you pissed. It's like the lights go out, everybody gives you a call. The lights are on, running perfectly, nobody's actually going to call you. So you have to understand that shared understanding is the fundamental coinage of value as you work with your client. If you don't actually have that shared understanding about what you're promising to deliver, when you're promising to deliver it, and what they can expect from it, there's going to be a disappointment there. And that disappointment sometimes, in the worst case scenario, ends up with attorneys making lots of money as they actually pull it out of both of your pockets. It could end up with you being sued in a worst case scenario, or maybe your project slips, or maybe you don't get more follow-on work, or maybe it goes to one of your competitors. So make sure that there's an understanding there and that you're actually dealing with that. Language is important here, right? I think everybody has done this, especially from a technical perspective, is that from time to time people say, well, how are you going to solve this problem? And you're like, oh, it's no problem. We're just going to actually install like the Fitter Happier plugin. I'm actually going to do another drop of a fork of a Git project that I just wrote last week. We'll actually do that and run it on a CI server, and we'll actually do a push deploy or cap deploy at the end of the day, and it'll be fine. And that person goes, huh? They didn't understand anything that you said because you weren't speaking them into their language. So not to offend any designers in the room, any designers, people who consider themselves mostly designers? Okay, I can offend the designers. Has anybody here actually ever worked with somebody who actually photoshopped something and then can't explain to them why the CSS or whatever, or why this isn't going to work? It's like, I drew a picture. This is actually a Photoshop document. I drew a picture. Why can't you make this like this? And then you have to go and try and explain to them why pushing 55 megs worth of video data over like a wireless channel like your iPhone isn't going to work. On an edge connection, things like that. That's one of those things, like it's a language and communication gap, and you really have to watch out for it, because a lot of times we have a tendency to speak in the languages in which we're comfortable and not actually make sure that the other person is actually understanding what we're saying. We speak in jargon a lot of the times. As a slight detour, this is actually one of the key points. This is one of the reasons why Agile is actually so effective at communicating value, right? Because one of the core concepts of Agile is that we're communicating things, and that you try and actually get buy-in and you're actually collaborating with people. And so it actually helps build those bridges of understanding because you're working so closely on a regular basis. And the incremental deliverables are actually there, so you end up having something that the person can see and understand, and that concrete object or deliverable, that like the spike that you did in 2 days, or basically what you're delivering once a week, basically make sure that you don't get too far off track. So that actually helps with understanding. So, once you have communication and understanding, these two things actually form the baseline of what we would otherwise refer to as marketing, right? That's it. This is the definition of marketing. Do you understand what I'm telling you, and am I communicating it effectively? It's like, this is actually one of the things that a lot of times as technologists we don't do well. We don't promote ourselves well. We don't market things well. We don't actually get the message out about, for instance, why one technology actually can provide better benefits, or what the actual benefits of that technology are. A lot of times we like to focus on the small, niggling details. So make sure that you understand the fundamentals and basics of marketing. Everybody familiar with like alternating current versus direct current? Is everybody familiar with like the concept of the war of the currents, and that we almost ended up on DC? Did you guys know that actually, in order to, Edison was actually so jealous about Tesla, he actually paid a guy under the table to create the electric chair? And that was actually what created the first human electrocution, because he was trying to prove that AC current was dangerous. So, I mean, this is marketing, right? He's got a message, he's got an agenda, he's pushing it. and he's using the tools at his disposal to do it. Well, as underhanded as that might have been, it came pretty close to working. So remember that, right? We've all been there when all of a sudden it's like you go in, you're saying, hey, we're going to go agile, we're going to go pair programming, and I think with this new language called Ruby is going to work. And there's some guy in the back of the room who's basically been doing Java for the past 10 years, and he's like, it's never going to work. And he starts a little whispering campaign, and the next thing you know, it's like, oh, but Ruby is slow. Yeah, but Rails doesn't scale. No, it's not. Wait, this is an enterprise. This isn't an enterprise application. I mean, we need enterprise class tools. This is what we always refer to as FUD, right? FUD is marketing. If you're communicating well and the person actually understands what you're actually showing as value, your marketing message will get through. Perfect example of this is Apple. Apple has a great marketing message. They have a great connection between the logical and the emotional side, and they have great communication. They have great people understand what their products are and what they mean to them. So remember this as you actually are thinking about it and as you're building brands. You have to have a marketing plan, and you need to put that in place to communicate what the value you have behind your brand and the value you have behind your services. Otherwise, people aren't going to see it, and they're actually not going to put a premium on it. So, the summary of selling value is really, once again, you've got to focus on a couple key things. Tell them what they're getting from you. Make sure that you're telling them exactly what to expect and exactly what they're going to get. Also, when you're doing that, make sure that you're focusing on that they've understood and they've heard what you said. That's really key. Then the final thing is keep telling them over and over and over again, because a lot of times your clients are slower than you think. So everybody's favorite part, right? You're all in business. You should actually like the revenue. Nobody likes getting paid? I certainly always had problems with it. Sometimes my clients didn't understand what net 30 meant. They actually put an extra zero on the end there. So getting paid, this is the key point, right? The whole point of delivering and actually understanding and generating value is so that you can actually somehow create revenue, and you can actually create an environment where you can actually get that revenue in the door more easily. So it's something I think everybody as an entrepreneur here actually has to worry about. You've got bills to pay, you've got actual commitments to meet, and a lot of those are financial. You've got to understand how you're going to get paid. So one of the first steps of actually getting paid and understanding to get paid on a value basis is you have to do your homework, right? Doing your homework means that you understand what's of value to the client. Is it time? I mean, are they budgetarily constrained? I think everybody has anybody here actually ever worked for a client where budget was not an option, like money was not an option? Yeah, it's really funny. It's a very weird feeling because we're so used to actually interacting with people for whom money is the primary concern. And all of a sudden when you're interacting with somebody who, like things like time is a primary concern, it's a whole different ballgame. They don't care about the money. They don't care what your bill rates are. They don't care what you're charging for your teams. They care that you can get it done Tuesday. And so now you have to actually start thinking about delivering the value in terms of, well, they're thinking about time. Maybe they're bootstrapping this themselves and they're trying to get funding. If you don't understand what is of value to them, you can't negotiate yourself into a position where you can actually get paid for your value. And that's actually one of the major things that we do wrong. We always assume people are interested in things like cost. We always assume people are interested in things like technology. These are hard, measurable things. Sometimes they're actually interested in you. Could be they could care less about your bill rate, but you were really nice at that party you went to. Maybe you got a friend referral. These are all things that you need to actually understand that enter into the value equation and it actually directly affects how you get paid and how much money you're going to be able to make. So another axiom, open with value. How many people here have actually been responsible for negotiating a deal or otherwise closing services contracts or selling a product for themselves or their company? Okay, a good number of you. How many people have actually ever been on the phone with somebody and the first thing that comes out of the mouth of somebody else who's sitting on the phone is, it's $199 an hour? And you're like, oh, crap. Now what do you do? Maybe the guy was willing to pay $500 an hour. How do you know? Maybe he actually said $199 an hour, I could never afford that. Maybe now all of a sudden he just goes quiet and he doesn't want to talk to you anymore. So think about this. Before you start talking about how you're going to get paid and what you're going to get paid, make sure that you actually open with what you can do for that person and they understand that value proposition. If they don't, getting paid is going to be a whole lot more difficult. Actually getting the right value base is going to be a whole lot more difficult. This is probably one of the most fundamental missteps is that, especially when we first get in business for ourselves, or we start working with things, or we start selling a product, we lead with the concept of it costs X, right? Because it's one of the easiest things to communicate, dollars, cents, as opposed to it does Y, right? Perfect example is like we work with New Relic, and they have a really great performance monitoring product, right? And it's amazing how many people we actually offer it as a service for people, and how many people it's like, well, no, I hadn't looked at New Relic, and then once we actually walk them through it, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And then they want to upgrade to one of the other packages. Because they actually, instead of saying it costs X, Y, or Z, we said, no, it does A, B, and C, and it allows you to actually do D, E, and F. And then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, they're like, oh wow, that means that we can do this, and then we could actually take somebody off from monitoring it every day, and we could actually spend it doing feature revs, and then they can start going on and start creating their own value proposition in their own chain, because we actually told them what it can do for them, not how much it's going to cost them. Nobody actually likes walking into a car dealership and actually having somebody look them up and down going, nah, I don't think you can afford it. So, I mean, anecdote about that is actually at one point in time I was actually a consultant, and I was doing pretty well for myself. I was young, and I was painting my house, and I had on this ratty pair of overalls, but I was driving this same Geo Metro. It was a 4-cylinder that I had had for since the college days, right? It was a blue bean Geo Metro, crap car. Couldn't pick up anybody in it. I was the guy valeting a Geo at the bar. Yeah. And so I decided, screw it. I've got a job. I'm okay. I'm going to go buy a BMW. And I just said, screw it. I'm going to go buy a BMW today. Because my friend, and actually the same friend I told you about who drove the 7 all the time, he's like, go buy a BMW. They're great. You'll love them, blah, blah, blah. At least go test drive one. So I show up, and I'm in these slightly ratty overalls and a gray T-shirt, and I'm looking around, and I can't get a single person to talk to me. It's like, I'm just like, I want to give you my money. Like, nobody will talk to me. And so I finally get kind of pissed off, and I leave, right? And then at the time I was consulting for a stock trading firm, which was very traditional. As in traditional as in everybody had to show up in coat and tie every day. So I went back that Monday, and I walked in, 15 seconds. Yes, sir, can I help you? And I told the guy, it's like, no, I just wanted to know if it was how I was dressed. And the guy just looks at me funny. He goes, I don't get it. He made an inherent assumption about what I could afford at price based on how I looked. He didn't even lead with anything. He just basically made the price assumption that I couldn't afford it, and therefore I wasn't worth his time. So if somebody had actually walked in and said, even come up to me and tried pitching with a value proposition, they would have sold me a car. I would have been like, I want one of these. And they would have been like, sure, do you want this and this and this? And I'd be like, sure, here's the check. And in fact, what I did when I did buy that car is I called up another dealership. I eventually got an Acura. And I basically called up one guy and I said, this is how much I'm willing to pay for this car. Will you give it to me for it? And he said, well, you should come down and talk to the business manager. And I hung up on him. I then called the next guy and said, I just talked to your other competitor in town and I just hung up on him. This is how much I'm willing to pay for this car. Are you willing to do it? And he said, sure, come on down. And he sold a car, and it was the weirdest thing ever. He's like, I've never sold a car in 5 minutes like that. So open with value, right? Make sure that you don't actually make the mistake of opening with price. It's something that we do a lot. Show, don't tell. This one's really, really important, right? Has anybody here ever actually worked with other consultant teams or mixed consulting teams where you have different groups of consultants all on the same thing or on the same project? Has anybody ever had that guy who just ran his freaking mouth but never did anything? At my last job, we totally put a J2EE server in and actually wrote the EJBs, and we did it in a week. And I think we can totally do that here too. I mean, and you're like, oh, that's great, Tom. Can you set that up? And he's like, oh yeah, I could, but I've got meetings all week or this or that. When you're delivering value to your clients, you've got to show them what it is. If you can't show or actually physically demonstrate that value, once again, it's not so much that it doesn't exist, but it has less value. It's not tangible. You've got to make this value tangible for them. This is actually one of those things where Agile, once again, plays right into this. We're all about collaborating with a client and working with them and showing them results about how their collaboration is working and giving them that feedback. So being able to do things like spike out whether or not something will work, or being able to actually deliver something on a sort of semi-regular basis, 3 days, 1 week, 2 week iterations, actually once again shows that you're doing work and there's actually value that's being generated. And the client can evaluate for themselves. You don't have to tell them that it's valuable. They can see the product being built, they can see it working, they can see it functioning. I actually bought my mom an iPhone, and she's like, I don't need a big fancy phone. I don't need this. I don't need that. Until I showed her that she could actually just touch on things to actually make phone calls. She's like, ooh, oh wow, that's cool. Now she sends me text messages. It's. Well, yeah, I'm just hoping it's like the day she discovers Twitter, I'm actually probably going to go dark. I'm going to have to actually go away. Sure, figures. His mom actually started reading his feed. I was just thinking the same thing. So yeah, you've got to show that value. You've got to continually show it, and you've got to make sure that it's easy for that client to understand. So focus on physical, tangible things that you can actually show to them as value. It's kind of important, and it really goes along with what we do with Agile anyway. So use it to your advantage. I always like this quote. I actually found it when I was doing some research for this. It's, persuasion is clearly a sort of demonstration, since we are most fully persuaded when we consider a thing to have been demonstrated. It's from Aristotle. And so the idea is like, I can tell you an atomic bomb can level a city, right? We all conceptually can understand that. An atomic bomb can level a city. How many people have actually seen the footage from Hiroshima and Nagasaki? How many people were actually like, whoa? It's like, it's one thing to sit there and say that you can wipe a city off the planet. It's another thing to sit there and say, actually see the footage of a city being wiped off the planet. Those are two entirely different things. And they actually have two entirely different both logical and emotional responses. And as we know, those are two of the key components of value, right? And so when somebody says that a bomb is now 100 times more powerful than the bomb that basically wiped out Nagasaki, now all of a sudden you've got this much broader concept that's anchored in a physical reality. So, when you sit there and tell somebody, it's like, I can actually build this project for you in 2 weeks, we think, after we've done this, the planning. And then you deliver it, you're sitting there, think about what they're thinking about what they can do in the next 6 months. Think about how valuable that is to them when they sit there and actually can open up their imagination. They're not worried about deadlines and timing and whether or not they're going to be cost overruns, because everybody knows that software people lie, right? It always takes twice as long and costs 4 times as much. So think about what happens when you actually deliver on that and you sit there and you show them that you can actually deliver on a value promise of, I can get it done faster, better, cheaper. Think about what that means for you in terms of follow-on projects, referral, revenue. That's value. It's demonstrable value. And it's the sort of value that people actually are willing to talk about. So, focus on demonstrating that value. It's going to be one of the best ways that you can actually preserve it and get paid for what you're doing. And so there's another axiom, actually, of getting paid that I think we, especially as developers, don't do. Obi touched on this in his keynote earlier, which was the idea that everybody needs to be getting paid more than $100 an hour. Price at value, not at cost, right? The value to something is completely relative. If I have a bottle of Evian, it may or may not be $3 or $4. However, if you just crawled through the Sahara, you're out of water, and you hadn't had a drink in 3 days, what's the going market rate for Evian?
What you got?
Exactly. It's the exact same thing. Value is relative. It's market-based. It's local. It's not necessarily rational. And this actually, lots of these things that come into generating value, they offend our logical brains, right? Well, it costs you, $6 to produce this thing. I don't understand why this plastic widget is $500. It's like, well, we at Acura are the only people who make it, which, by the way, was exactly what happened to me when a plastic bracket that kept my headlight on broke. I'm like, it's a piece of plastic. And they're like, yeah, but it's our piece of plastic. So, focus and price at value. This is something you need to learn, and it goes all the way back to the concept of doing your homework. If you have done your homework, you will be able to understand what the value is. So, that's one of the key points. Other key points are actually when you start talking about protecting your value is like know when to walk away. I think everybody's actually had a deal where all of a sudden they keep doing things like cutting your fee, or the guy's like, you say $200, and he's like, and you're like 175, and he's like, and then you kind of get desperate. 150, 135. How many people would actually try and date a girl that way? Or a guy? I mean, you don't. It's like if you walk up to a girl and be like, hey, you want to go out Friday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 4 p.m. When are you free? No. It's like, hey, I'm free Friday. You want to go out? Much better approach. Make sure that you actually understand that and actually don't undercut yourself and actually start undercutting your own value. Because here's the other thing. When you do that, the next time you come back to that client for follow-on work and all their friends, guess what they're going to do? Hey, you charge Bob $86 an hour, right? So there are lots of things you can do to do that. There are pricing NDAs and there are other things that you can put in place. But the fundamental point is make sure you price that value and make sure you take all efforts to protect that value as you sell it. Don't cut yourself short. Skip the work and do something else and work on your own side project before you start basically cutting your rates to the bone, because it basically sets a really bad precedent. We actually talked to some gentleman who actually talked about this very same concept from another company, and he had a great phrase for it, which was, he must always protect the integrity of his fee. So protect the integrity of your fee and actually make sure that you understand what it is that you're getting paid for. So the last kind of key closing thing that I wanted to talk about was like some of the philosophical concept behind value. And there are two key things that weren't up on any of these slides, but you actually have to understand. Selling on value is basically all about trust and honesty. The person has to believe honestly that you're providing them something of value and that you're selling it in good faith and you're being honest about it, right? If you can't do it in 2 weeks, you have to tell the person you can't do it in 2 weeks. If you actually can't deliver upon a promise or you're going to slip on something that you already did promise, it's your responsibility to notify that person. And otherwise, what ends up happening is that value ends up getting turned into something that feels more like a fraud or a poor exchange. So we actually all have a responsibility to do that as consultants and actually as business owners, deliver on an actual brand promise for our product. And then the other concept is that I think when you start selling based on quality and you actually start getting paid based on quality, there's an artisanal effect that comes out, right? You're focusing on the craftsmanship. You're focusing on what you can actually deliver that's of value to your client. And you're actually allowed to take the time that allows you to build the best possible solution for that client in the time and with the monies allotted. That's kind of it. There's my contact info. You can always get me at any of those addresses. Or follow me on Twitter and send me something if you have any other questions. But other than that, I wanted to thank you very much for your attention. Hopefully you found it of value.